The studio lights at Fox News reflected off Judge Anthony Trenga's forehead as he straightened his tie. At 78, the federal judge appeared calm and composed, unaffected by the glaring cameras around him. With his silver hair and a serious expression, he exuded the presence of a seasoned jurist. This rare television appearance was his choice, made to address the controversy surrounding his recent ruling that had sent shockwaves through Washington. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, a former Trump White House official turned media figure. She smiled warmly, but her gaze was sharp, focused, and intent, something the judge hadn't yet picked up on. "Judge Trenga, thank you for joining us," Leavitt began, her tone professional, yet carrying an undertone of resolve. "Your ruling has sparked considerable debate nationwide." Trenga nodded with assurance, his voice firm. "I stand by my decision, based on constitutional principles, Ms. Leavitt. The law, Judge Trenga firmly believed, must be applied impartially, without the influence of politics. What initially appeared to be a routine interview was about to take a dramatic turn. Moments before, a production assistant had quietly slipped a document into Leavitt's hands, court records that had been sealed until just recently. Trenga, completely unaware, was about to be blindsided. "Before we discuss your ruling," Leavitt began, holding up the folder with deliberate calm, "I'd like to address something that has just surfaced regarding your judicial history and connections, details you've never publicly disclosed." The judge's face went stiff, his gaze snapping toward the folder. In the next 90 seconds, Leavitt would drop a bombshell, information that not only challenged his ruling, but could potentially undermine his entire judicial career. It was a moment poised to go viral across the nation. Before we dive into this explosive revelation, make sure to comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next political truth bomb. Judge Anthony Trenga had earned his reputation as a legal powerhouse over 4 decades of service, but today, that legacy was about to be put to the test. Appointed to the federal bench by President George W. Bush in 2008, Judge Anthony Trenga of the Eastern District of Virginia had overseen a series of high-profile cases throughout his career. Admirers hailed his meticulous approach and unwavering commitment to strict legal interpretation. However, his critics accused him of infusing certain rulings with political bias. Despite this, Trenga had cultivated an image of judicial invulnerability, an authority figure whose decisions were seen as beyond reproach. Outside the courtroom, Trenga kept a low profile. He rarely participated in interviews, declined most public speaking opportunities, and upheld the reserved demeanor expected from federal judges. His appearance on Fox News marked a significant break from his usual reticence, driven by the public outcry surrounding his controversial ruling that had blocked a major administration policy on immigration enforcement. At just 29 years old, Karoline Leavitt represented a fresh wave of political communicators. The former assistant press secretary in the Trump White House had successfully transitioned to broadcasting, where she quickly gained a reputation for her exhaustive research and a sharp eye for uncovering details others overlooked. Unlike many TV hosts, Karoline Leavitt took a hands-on approach to her work, staying up late to sift through documents and research before key interviews. This confrontation was no ordinary media appearance. It carried weight far beyond the typical TV segment. Judge Trenga's ruling had effectively blocked the implementation of a border security directive that impacted millions of Americans. The administration condemned the decision as judicial overreach, while its critics hailed it as a necessary check on executive power. With appeals underway, Trenga's credibility had suddenly become crucial, not just for his legacy, but for the future of national policy enforcement. The atmosphere in the Fox News studio that morning was charged with tension. Producers were caught off guard when Leavitt showed up 3 hours early, requesting access to the research team and making a flurry of urgent calls. Something significant was unfolding behind the scenes. By the time Trenga arrived, Leavitt had filled 3 legal pads with notes and placed a sealed folder on the set beside her. "We're going live in 3 minutes," the floor director announced, as makeup artists made last-minute adjustments to both Leavitt and Trenga. The judge sat confidently, completely unaware that Karoline Leavitt had spent the morning verifying a tip from a courthouse source that would soon turn everything on its head. "Judge, is there anything you'd like to clarify before we begin?" Leavitt asked, her tone casual as the countdown to live broadcast ticked down. "No, I believe I'm ready," Trenga replied with a self-assured smile. "These are complex legal issues. but I'm prepared to walk your viewers through my reasoning. Leavitt nodded, her expression betraying nothing as the red light above camera one flickered on. The moment that would captivate the nation was about to unfold. Welcome back to the Truth Agenda, Leavitt began, staring directly into the camera. Today, we're joined by federal Judge Anthony Trenga, whose recent ruling has temporarily blocked the administration's new border enforcement policy. She turned toward the judge. Judge Trenga, let's start with the core of your decision. Trenga launched into a polished explanation, referencing legal precedents and constitutional principles. For the first few minutes, the conversation unfolded as expected, a professional discussion of legal details and technicalities. Viewers might have expected a dry, academic discussion on judicial philosophy. But then, Leavitt subtly shifted gears. Judge, you've stressed the importance of impartiality in your ruling. Would you say that's always been your guiding principle on the bench? She asked, her tone still measured, but with a hint of something more. Without question, Trenga responded, his voice firm. Impartiality is the cornerstone of our judicial system. Leavitt pressed on, maintaining the casual tone but with a growing sense of purpose. And financial disclosures for federal judges. Would you agree that these are essential for transparency? A slight flicker of discomfort crossed Trenga's face, but he quickly responded, of course, all federal judges file the required disclosures annually. Leavitt nodded, then reached for the folder beside her. That's what makes this newly unsealed information so troubling, Judge Trenga, she said, her voice now steady but with an unmistakable edge. She pulled several documents from the folder and laid them on the table between them. These court records were just unsealed this morning, following a FOIA request from our investigative team. The camera zoomed in on the papers, drawing attention to the official seals and signatures. Trenga's gaze narrowed ever so slightly, though he kept his composure intact. According to these documents, Leavitt continued, her voice calm, yet resolute. You held significant investments in Geoforce security partners between 2017 and 2021. This private contractor stands to gain from specific immigration enforcement measures. However, this connection was never disclosed in your financial reports. Trenga's posture stiffened noticeably. Miss Leavitt, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I can assure you my disclosures have always been complete and accurate. Leavitt raised an eyebrow and flipped to the next document. That's interesting, she said, her tone now sharper. Because here we have a 2018 partnership agreement, signed by you, Judge Trenga. The tension in the studio was palpable as Leavitt laid out the facts. Geoforce received over $70 million in federal contracts tied to border security during the period you held these investments. And just last year, you ruled on 3 cases that directly impacted immigration enforcement, without disclosing any potential conflict of interest. The atmosphere in the studio shifted. A producer whispered urgently into his headset, while cameramen exchanged concerned looks. Trenga's face, once confident, now betrayed a flicker of unease. These documents need context, Trenga insisted, his voice tightening as he tried to regain control of the situation. Your son-in-law, Robert Kessler, manages your investment portfolio, correct? Leavitt interjected, her voice steady. Yes, we're aware he handles these investments, Trenga confirmed. Leavitt didn't pause. But federal disclosure rules are very clear. Judges must report all financial interests, no matter who manages them, particularly when ruling on related matters. Trenga reached for his water glass and took a deliberate sip. The camera caught a subtle tremor in his hand, though he quickly composed himself. Miss Leavitt, he began, his voice measured. This is not the appropriate forum to discuss complex financial matters that could easily be misconstrued. Leavitt didn't relent. With all due respect, Judge, you chose to appear on national television to defend your ruling. Shouldn't the American people be aware of potential connections that might influence such crucial decisions? She flipped to the next document. Our investigation also found that you attended private conferences sponsored by interest groups with clear stances on immigration policy, conferences that weren't disclosed on your official calendar. Here's an attendance record from the Southwestern Policy Institute's closed-door session in 2021, Leavitt continued, her voice steady as she placed the document in front of the judge. This meeting explicitly discussed strategies for challenging executive actions on immigration. The atmosphere in the studio became even more charged as Leavitt revealed an email exchange between Trenga and the Institute's director, outlining judicial approaches to limiting administrative overreach. An exchange dated just weeks before Trenga's controversial ruling. Judge Trenga, how do you reconcile these private communications with your claim of impartiality? Leavitt asked, her tone calm but her questions increasingly pointed. Trenga's expression tightened. This interview was meant to address the constitutional principles behind my ruling, not to conduct a character assassination based on selectively presented documents. Leavitt remained unshaken. We're simply presenting facts that the public has a right to know, she responded, her voice unwavering. Especially since your ruling directly impacts national policy, Leavitt continued, her words cutting through the tension. The floor director made a sharp motion across his throat, signaling for a commercial break, but Leavitt waved him off. The network executives in the control room decided to let the interview run, knowing the ratings were likely soaring. One more question before the break, Judge, Leavitt said, pulling out the final document. Can you explain why, according to these court records, you failed to recuse yourself from the Martinez case last year, despite having previously represented the defendant's business partner in private practice? The Judicial Code of Conduct is very clear about such conflicts. Trenga's expression shifted to one of shock and anger as he realized just how thoroughly Leavitt had researched him. What had started as a straightforward discussion about a single ruling had quickly morphed into a full-scale investigation of his judicial conduct. The escalation was undeniable, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown that would soon be shared across social media. We need to take a break, Trenga said, his voice firm, as he reached to remove his microphone. Actually, Judge, we're still on air, Leavitt replied calmly, her eyes locked on him. And I believe the viewers deserve answers to these questions about potential conflicts of interest. Meanwhile, the control room was in chaos. The executive producer was frantically consulting with the legal team, while the floor director stood frozen, uncertain whether to push for the commercial break or let the interview continue. What had begun as a straightforward interview had now escalated into potentially historic television. Trenga leaned forward, his judicial composure slipping. These allegations are misleading and lack proper context, he said, his voice tight. My rulings have always been based on legal principles, not personal interests. Leavitt wasn't swayed. Then you should have no problem addressing the specific documents, she retorted, sliding the partnership agreement closer to him. This shows your signature on an investment that directly benefited from the very policies you later ruled against. The American people deserve to know, was this disclosed to the parties in the case? The moment crystallized when Leavitt, with calculated precision, displayed a split screen. On one side, Trenga's 2019 financial disclosure forms. On the other, the investment documents, with the glaring discrepancy now visible to millions of viewers. The judicial ethics rules require disclosure of any financial interest that could be substantially affected by the outcome of a proceeding, Leavitt stated, citing the specific code section. These investments appear nowhere on your official disclosures, despite potentially being impacted by your rulings. Trenga's face had gone pale. His decades of legal experience had not prepared him for this methodical, public dissection of his conduct. These investment structures are complex, Trenga began, but even he could hear the hollowness in his own voice. Leavitt didn't miss a beat. Perhaps you could explain this email, she said, displaying the message on the screen for all to see. Here you wrote to the Southwestern Policy Institute, looking forward to discussing strategic approaches to the border situation at next month's retreat. This was sent just 10 days before you received the case challenging the administration's policy. The control room, sensing the mounting tension, decided to intervene, cutting to an unscheduled commercial break. But the damage had already been done. As the on-air light went dark, Trenga yanked off his microphone, his frustration boiling over. This ambush is unconscionable, he snapped, standing up abruptly. I was invited to discuss constitutional principles, not to defend myself against uncontextualized documents thrown at me without warning. Leavitt, unfazed, remained seated, her composure unwavering. Judge Trenga, everything I've presented is documented and verified. The public has a right to know about potential conflicts that could impact decisions on national policy. I will not continue this farce, Trenga declared, turning toward the exit. My office will issue a formal statement addressing these mischaracterizations. As Trenga reached the studio door, Leavitt delivered her final question, unyielding. Judge, given these revelations, would you recuse yourself from the pending appeal? Leavitt asked, her voice steady but sharp. Trenga hesitated for a moment, visibly struggling to keep his composure. Then, Without answering, he pushed through the door, effectively ending the interview by walking off the set. When the broadcast resumed, viewers were met with Leavitt sitting alone at the desk. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, Judge Trenga has chosen to leave our interview," she said calmly, her eyes unwavering. "We will continue to investigate these troubling documents regarding undisclosed conflicts of interest in our federal judiciary. After all, a judiciary above reproach is vital to our democratic system." The victory was undeniable, not through loud confrontations or sweeping accusations, but through a methodical presentation of verified facts that even the judge could not refute. Leavitt had uncovered disturbing patterns that raised serious questions about judicial impartiality in a case with far-reaching implications for national policy. And she had done it all while maintaining a calm professionalism, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. As producers and crew members exchanged stunned looks, Leavitt methodically gathered her documents, aware that within minutes, clips of the interview would be circulating across social media and news outlets nationwide. The exposure that started in that studio was set to reverberate through the judicial system and could potentially impact the future of the policy Trenga had blocked. Less than 30 minutes after the broadcast, #Trenga exposed and #Leavitt's receipts were trending across social media. The moment when Trenga stormed off the set was clipped and shared thousands of times, along with the split screen revealing the glaring discrepancies in his financial disclosures. Major news networks scrambled to cover the unfolding story. CNN quickly aired a special report titled "Judicial Ethics in Question: The Trenga Revelations." Even outlets that had typically supported Trenga's judicial philosophy couldn't ignore the documentary evidence Leavitt had laid out. "What we witnessed today was extraordinary," remarked a legal analyst on MSNBC. Not just the revelations themselves, but the fact that a judge of Trenga's stature appeared unprepared to address these documented conflicts. By the evening, the story had exploded beyond the initial interview. Journalists began digging into other Trenga rulings, looking for similar patterns, while legal ethics experts weighed in on the significance of the undisclosed connections. Federal judges must maintain not only actual impartiality but also the appearance of impartiality, explained a judicial ethics professor during an evening news segment. Undisclosed financial interests that could be affected by rulings go to the very heart of judicial integrity. The Justice Department announced it would review the information brought to light in the interview, while the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts indicated it would investigate whether proper disclosure protocols had been followed. 6 hours after the interview, Trenga's office released a statement. "Judge Trenga has served the federal judiciary with distinction for 15 years. The selective presentation of documents without proper context does a disservice to the public's understanding of judicial financial disclosures. Judge Trenga will address these matters through the appropriate channels, not through media spectacle." However, the statement only intensified the coverage, with commentators pointing out that it failed to directly address or refute any of the documents Leavitt had presented. For Karoline Leavitt, the aftermath marked a professional triumph. Her methodical approach, presenting well-documented evidence rather than relying on sensational questions, was widely praised across the political spectrum. Regardless of one's stance on immigration policy, wrote a columnist for The Washington Post, Leavitt's interview exemplified the highest standards of accountability journalism. She came armed with facts, not just opinions. Fox News quickly capitalized on the moment, teasing upcoming exclusive follow-up reports from Leavitt, who had reportedly uncovered similar patterns of undisclosed conflicts involving other federal judges. Network executives, initially concerned about the confrontational nature of the interview, now hailed it as the most significant exposure of judicial conflicts in a generation. The policy ramifications were equally profound. Legal scholars began debating whether Trenga's ruling could hold given the apparent conflicts of interest. The administration filed an emergency motion, citing the newly uncovered information and calling for Trenga's recusal from further proceedings. Just 3 days after the interview, the story's impact deepened. The Senate Judiciary Committee announced hearings on the effectiveness of judicial financial disclosure requirements and their enforcement mechanisms. The American people deserve complete confidence in the impartiality of our federal courts, the committee chairman declared. These revelations raise serious concerns about whether our current disclosure system is sufficient. For Judge Trenga, the fallout was swift and severe. Fellow judges distanced themselves, canceling joint appearances, and law schools withdrew speaking invitations. Most notably, the Chief Judge of the Eastern District of Virginia announced that, pending a full review, Trenga's cases would be reassigned to other judges. 1 week after the interview, the broader pattern Leavitt had uncovered led to a Justice Department Inspector General investigation into the financial disclosure practices of federal judges nationwide. What began as a single interview had quickly escalated into a wide-ranging examination of judicial transparency. Legal analysts speculated that Trenga's ruling on the immigration policy would likely be overturned and the case reassigned, not due to flaws in his legal reasoning, but because of the appearance of impropriety created by the undisclosed conflicts. As a result, the administration's policy would likely proceed as originally planned, while new legal challenges made their way through different courts. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the interview, however, was how Leavitt's methodical approach reshaped the way judicial interviews were conducted. News organizations began dedicating more resources to scrutinizing judicial financial disclosures and connections before major interviews, no longer taking judicial impartiality at face value. What Leavitt demonstrated, explained a media critic, is that thorough preparation and verified documentation can hold even the most untouchable figures accountable. The days of one-sided judicial interviews may be over. The story of Judge Trenga and Karoline Leavitt went far beyond a single confrontation over a ruling. It highlighted the crucial role of transparency and accountability in democratic systems, showing how one prepared journalist, armed with verified documents, could expose potential conflicts of interest that directly impacted national policy decisions. For Americans watching the drama unfold, the message was unmistakable. In a true democracy, no authority, whether it's a federal judge or any other figure, should be immune from scrutiny when their decisions impact the lives of millions. The next time a judge handed down a controversial ruling, viewers knew to ask not only about the legal reasoning, but also about any potential undisclosed influences shaping the decision. This wasn't just about immigration policy or the personal investments of a single judge. It was about ensuring that decisions affecting everyday Americans were made impartially, based on law, not hidden personal interests. Karoline Leavitt didn't just expose the secrets of one judge. She reminded the nation that transparency is the cornerstone of justice. If you found this analysis insightful, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth looks at the stories behind today's most pivotal political confrontations. Drop your thoughts on judicial accountability in the comments below and let us know which political figure you'd like us to investigate next. Until our next report, remember that in a democracy, sunlight is the best disinfectant, even in the highest echelons of power.